the Holy Family. And if you know anything about Christianity, you know that, of course, this is a very clear reference to Christianity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. But of course, he's not talking about Christianity here. He's talking about the Young Hegelians. And he used to be part of the Young Hegelians, and in part, the people he's criticizing are also, or were also, his friends. But he's moved beyond them now. After having been influenced by Feuerbach, you'll see that he's moved beyond Young Hegelian philosophy. So this particular work was written in 1844, and it is the first major work in which Marx and Engels collaborate and produce something co-written, co-authored, etc. The Holy Family refers not to the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, but to Bruno Bauer, his brother Edgar Bauer, and Max Stirner, all three of whom are the leading lights in their time of what is referred to as the Young Hegelian movement. The aim of the Young Hegelians is to criticize Christianity in such a way as to create the critical renovation of Christianity. And that's why they refer to their philosophy as, critical criticism. And that's why Marx and Engels make fun of that and say this is a critique of critical criticism. Long sort of words which the Germans no doubt love. So the Young Hegelians were of the view that freedom could be achieved through, number one, a philosophical critique of religion, but secondly, also a renovation of Christianity, a new kind of Christianity which would emphasize the essence of what it means to be religious, rather than what the church, etc., preaches. For that reason, the Young Hegelians were considered also by the Orthodox to be atheists and to be dangerous people, etc. But Marx and Engels thought that they may appear really dangerous, but actually they're basically sheep in wolves' clothing. They're actually not really seriously dangerous to the given social order. Because in Marx's view and Engels' view, human emancipation could only come through the transformation of social and economic conditions, in particular through the abolition of class society. So they wanted to stand against economic exploitation. And the Young Hegelians, they were not really talking about economic exploitation as such. When they did, it was by matter of a tangential, by manner of a tangent, rather than being their direct criticism. Their direct criticism was mainly on religion. More importantly, with the Young Hegelians, Marx and Engels felt that the Hegelian system as a whole, so it's not just the Young Hegelians that he's actually criticizing. In fact, he's basically criticizing the entire Hegelian system. He feels that the whole Hegelian system and the way that it approaches a criticism of society is exhausted by this particular point in time, and that exhaustion can be seen, its capacity for criticism, the exhaustion of its capacity for criticism can be seen in the form of the Young Hegelians. So they're criticizing the Young Hegelians, but at the same time they're also criticizing someone that they've been inspired by, which is Hegel himself. So they write what they write, I've sort of paraphrased for you to make it easier for you to understand. I am going to go almost line by line through just these 2 pages so that we understand what they say. So they write that what the Hegelians do, and this of course includes the Young Hegelians in particular, but generally all Hegelians, what they do is that from real apples, oranges, pears, strawberries, almonds, they form the idea of the fruit. This is not hard. They're all different kinds of fruit. So from different concrete forms of fruit, you get one general abstract form of fruit. This is easy to understand. From all the concrete kinds of boys that are sitting in this class, we get the idea of a boy as a generality. This is what we refer to as a generalization. Okay? And or we can also refer to it as an abstraction. An abstraction just means I'm not talking about any concrete person. I'm talking about boys, men as an abstraction, or fruit as an abstraction, and so on. Then they argue that this abstract idea, fruit, the essence of a fruit, this abstract idea of the fruit exists objectively, that is outside of our mind, etc. It exists somewhere out there in the realm of ideas. It exists as a substance. It is the true essence. So this essence exists somewhere, and that is the true essence, and that fruit is the substance of the pear, the apple, the almond. Okay? So the actual substance of all the fruits you see exists somewhere as an essence, and that is the concept around which a fruit is created. This is, if you think about it a little bit, this is very much the argument of Plato as positing that essences are distinct from matter. This means that their essence is not their real existence, he says. The real existence is the concrete existence of the different kinds of fruit. The real existence is what you perceive through your senses, etc., of that particular fruit. But the abstract idea. In other words, the abstract idea of the fruit, is the real thing. And the concretely existing different kinds of fruit is just kind of something that is taken from that abstract idea of the fruit. It is the manifestation of the abstract idea of the fruit in various concrete forms. All real apples, pears, almonds, etc. are mere forms of existence of what? Fruit. So fruit is kind of an abstract idea. Its forms of existence. The forms of existence of this abstract idea are the concretely existing different kinds of fruit that we see. Do you see the difference? In the first part, we got the idea of the fruit from the actually concretely existing fruits, from the real fruits that exist. But here now they've turned it around and said that the idea of the fruit is what is real, and the concretely existing fruit is the manifestation in matter of that idea. So in Hegel's system, the sensuous differences between apples and pears are declared inessential and irrelevant. The fact that apples and pears have differences is not what is essential. What is essential is that they are all fruits. And they, in a certain sense, partake in the quiddity of being a fruit by being concretely different fruits. If this is confusing, it should be, because we don't think like this anymore, and we shouldn't think like this anymore. Because the idea of fruit as a generality is taken from actual existing fruits. But in their minds, it's the opposite. The actual existing fruits are somehow participating in the idea of a fruit, and hence are the concrete manifestations of the general idea of a fruit. Why is he talking about fruits in the first place? It's not because he's gone all fruity on you people. The reason is he's giving you an explanation of what the Hegelian system is doing with the idea of history, with the idea of God, and how the methodology of the Hegelian system really functions. So in the Hegelian system, the sensuous difference between apples and pears, sensuous difference in matlab ye, the difference that we can sense through our sense perception. We can feel that an apple tastes different and a pear tastes different and an almond tastes different. That sensuous difference, that difference that you can feel, taste through your touch, and you can see that it's different, that's irrelevant, because they're all basically, everything is just a fruit, and that is its most essential and important quality. Rather than its concrete existence being its most essential and important quality, the generalization from that concrete existence is said to exist objectively and is declared to be the more important aspect. This becomes an empty method, because no one can get any real information, he says, about the concrete world from these abstractions. If you go into the abstraction and you go back to the concrete, you end up with, what do you end up with? You've already abstracted away from the concrete to create the abstraction. Now you want to go back to it. On the basis of the abstraction, you won't get anything concrete. Whatever there is concrete can only be gotten from the actual concretely existing fruit, rather than from the abstraction. So he says, for example, mineralogist, whose whole science was limited to the statement that all minerals are really the mineral, would be a mineralogist only in his imagination. But that's exactly what the Hegelian system is in fact doing. It's positing somehow this abstraction of history, God, or whatever, the truth, absolute truth, the mind, as being the real entity that is moving everything. And the concretely really existing history as just being kind of the movement of that spirit in matter. what does Bruno Bauer say? This is Bruno Bauer, by the way, the man against whom this book is being written. To say something concrete, one needs concrete information. It is impossible, he says, to arrive at the opposite of an abstraction without relinquishing the abstraction. So you have to let go of the abstraction to move from the concrete to the abstract. You have to let go of the concrete. To move from the abstract back to the concrete, you have to let go of the abstraction. But when the Hegelians move back from the abstract to the concrete, they do this in a mystical fashion. What does he mean by this? In a mystical fashion. When the Hegelian system moves from the abstract to the concrete, it does so in a mystical fashion. Why? They ask, the Hegelians, why does the fruit manifest itself to me sometimes as an apple, sometimes as a pear, and sometimes as an almond? We're not discussing fruits here. We're discussing societies. Why does history sometimes manifest as feudalism, sometimes manifest as medieval, as a slave society, as primitive communism, or as, the unhappy consciousness, or whatever? Why does history manifest itself in these different ways? What Marx is going to try and point out is, it's not that history is manifesting that way, but you are abstracting from history, from actual history, to create these absolutes. Why this semblance of diversity, they ask? This is Max Stirner, by the way. Why this semblance of diversity which so obviously contradicts my speculative conception of unity, the substance, the fruit? So again, the fruit, the abstraction, is the substance according to Hegelian terminology, and that is the unity. That unity is fragmented. Remember when I told you nature, the concept of unity in nature is fragmented? That unity is somehow fragmented. The idea of the fruit is fragmented into different fruits. And they're asking this question, why does the concept of the fruit appear to us in this fragmented way that we see different fruits, apples and pears and almonds and oranges and so on? It's a kind of really wacky thing to say, isn't it? He answers, what is the answer he provides, the Hegelian? He answers, because the fruit is not dead, undifferentiated, motionless, but a living, self-differentiating, moving essence. So because the essence of the fruit is changing, that's why we see different manifestations of the fruit. Because the essence of the truth is changing, that's why we see so many different manifestations of relative truth. Because the essence of the mind, spirit, etc. is changing, that's why we see so many manifestations of the mind, spirit, in the form of different kinds of states and societies and religions. That's the methodology of Hegelianism. Ordinary fruits, in other words, are different manifestations of the life of the one fruit. There is a one fruit living somewhere in the abstract, transcendental realm of thought. And every concretely existing fruit is a manifestation of that. And since that essence, for Plato that essence was fixed, the essence of a fruit could not change. The essence of God could not change. The essence of truth could not change. The essence of justice could not change. But for Hegel, that does change. And as that changes, we see changes also in the material manifestation of that idea. And that's how Hegel looks at history as a movement. That history moves and societies change because the manifestation of the absolute is itself transforming and changing. The mind, the spirit, the Geist is changing. And so you see societies also changing with it. That's the Hegelian system. So the fruit presents itself, therefore, as a pear, an apple, an almond, or the spirit presents itself as different kinds of societies. It's not about the fruit, is it? It's about societies. But he is giving you this easy way to understand what is wrong with the Hegelian system. This, they say, is the life process of the fruit. So the fruit goes through a life process because the essence of the fruit is going through its own changes, dialectical and so on. And because the Geist is going through its changes, hence the manifestation of the Geist in the material world is also going through its changes. But this obviously can't be correct. Thus, the fruit is no longer an empty, undifferentiated unity. When we take from the abstract, when we come down to the concrete, now it is not an undifferentiated unity. It is oneness as allness, as totality of fruits which constitute an organically linked series of members. In other words, the fruit manifests itself as organically linked series of fruits. As the essence of the fruit is changing, the manifestation, the material manifestation of that fruit is also changing in a dialectical, organically linked series in a manner that changes from one to another. In every member of that series, the fruit gives itself a more developed, more explicit existence. In other words, the fruit continues to develop further and further, until finally, as the summary of all fruits, it is at the same time the living unity which contains all those fruits dissolved in itself, just as it produces them from within itself. All becomes one and one becomes all. As the fruit changes, the essence of the fruit changes, the manifestation of all the fruits also goes through a change. As the fruit reaches its absolute fruitiness, it's sounding crazy, I know, it becomes the absolute thing that it's coming to. The spirit becomes absolute. It recognizes itself as being absolute. The manifestation of that spirit also becomes the absolute. And now the whole of all of the manifestations of the fruit are contained within the generality of fruit, and the generality of the fruit, the oneness of the fruit, is manifested in all the diversity that you see in the material real world. This is the Hegelian system. So the development of the fruit are just moments in the life of the fruit. Christian religion knows only one incarnation of God. To give you, now what is he really talking about? This is what he's talking about. The movement and development of society and religion and so on. So Christians have one incarnation of God. God is this, that's it, doesn't change, like the Platonic truth, etc. Hegelian philosophy has as many incarnations as there are things. So it has many incarnations of different religions that are developing in time. Every incarnation is the development of the unity of God. Yes, there is unity, but also there is diversity. Why is this diversity? Because the unity in conceptual terms is represented as diversity in its material manifestation. You point to the unity of fruits. Take, for example, God. The fruit realizes itself by degrees and necessarily progresses from its existence as a raisin to its existence as an almond. So the fruit is developing as a consequence of the development of the essence. Same thing. This is all Hegelianism. Young Hegelians, therefore, perform a miracle by producing the real natural objects, the apple, the pears, etc., out of the unreal creation of the mind, the fruit. In other words, the unreal creation, the generalization about all the fruits that you actually seen, has acquired for the Hegelians a real existence. The most important thing is the intellectual generalizations that they themselves got by looking at the empirical world. But just as God gets manifested in Feuerbachian thought as the externalization of the human essence, in much the same way, not only is the essence of the fruit externalized as substance, as an objective entity existing outside of real fruits, but it is simultaneously also thought of as being the real unity that moves and develops the diversity that we see in real life. By creating those fruits out of his own abstract reason, which he considers as an absolute subject outside himself, represented here as the fruit. So what the Hegelians do is, actually they're looking at society, and from society they're making this generalization. That's not wrong. That's fine. We all do that. But what is wrong is that they take that generalization and then they imagine that that generalization exists in this, exists as a real substance, as an objective entity that determines the movement of society, history, reality, nature, and so on. It's not, it should be the other way around, is what Marx is going to try and point out. Hegelians, see, Marx is turning Hegel upside down, as you can see. Hegelians take a universally known qualities of the apple, the pear, etc., which exist in reality, that they are fruits, different from vegetables, etc., I broke this paragraph up so that we would understand it better. So that's the first step they do. They make a generalization out of all the fruits that exist. What do they do next? As determining features invented by him, so they make them into determining features. What determines the apple is the concept of the apple as a fruit is the concept of the fruit. Although I got the concept of the fruit by looking at real apples and oranges, etc. And by giving the names of the real things to what abstract reason alone can create, to abstract formulas of reason, they think that the generalizations that they come to by examining nature are the real things, and the real things become, in a certain sense, the manifestations of these abstract ideas. Finally, by declaring his own activity, by which he passes from the idea of an apple to the idea of a pear to be the self-activity of the absolute subject, the fruit. So finally, this whole dialectical philosophy, this whole dialectic of taking this idea of the fruit and saying that exists independently of all fruits, and all fruits are a manifestation of that idea. This is an activity done by whom? By Hegelian intellectuals. So this they declare to be the self-activity of the absolute subject. So this abstraction that they've created, this generalization that they've created, they declare to be the absolute subject, the thinking thing, the essence that moves everything else. This operation is called comprehending, in Hegelian terminology, substances as subject, as an inner process, as an absolute person. And this comprehension constitutes the essential character of Hegel's method. When you read in Hegel, comprehending substance as subject, what does it mean? What is the substance? The substance is that generalization taken out of all the existing things. Comprehending it as subject means that it is the thing upon which the whole material world is moving, changing, and developing. The abstractions of the mind, which were based on reality, are declared to be real. And the reality is declared to be the manifestation of these abstractions. Clearly, Hegel has everything upside down, Marx will say. So Marx writes, in the same book, in a different place, he says, this is wrong. To think that history manifests itself in feudal society and capitalist society and slave society, etc., this is the wrong way to look at things. History does nothing. There's no such thing as history which is standing outside of concretely existing humans, which is determining how humans are going to evolve. History does nothing. There's no such thing as the idea of history standing above history, which is determining history. This is confusion. History does nothing. It possesses no immense wealth. It wages no battles. Then who does it? It is man, real, living man, who does all of that, who possesses and fights. History is not, as it were, a person apart, using man as a means to achieve its own aims. History is nothing but the activity of man pursuing his aims. See how he's reversed Hegel entirely? Once again, let me summarize it for you. For Hegel, you can see all these different societies, just as he can see all these different fruits. He abstracts from it the idea of the fruit, or he abstracts from it the idea of history as sort of existing outside of this, and posits that it exists almost objectively as an object, as a substance, and that the real history of human beings is somehow or the other following the pattern, the mold, the model, the dialectical process of this idea, the spirit, the Geist, which he's also referring to as history. Totally wrong. It's the other way around. Everything you do becomes history. History doesn't make you do it. It becomes history because you do it. That's what history is, says Marx. When you think in this way, he continues, you end up counterposing the spirit and the mass. What is the spirit? The spirit, of course, is the essence, history, the Geist, idea, fruit, the fruit, or whatever. And what is the mass? The mass is the reality, the people, actual concretely existing history, actual concretely existing societies. Now he says Hegel didn't go too wrong. At least Hegel accepted or wrote that the owl of Minerva takes flight only at dusk. What the hell does that mean anyway? It's a very famous quotation from Hegel. Minerva, the owl of Minerva is supposed to represent wisdom. So when does the owl of Minerva open its wings and fly? At the dusk, only at dusk. When history has already changed, Hegel is saying, then the philosophers come and say, oh, this is what's happened. That's Hegel's view. But for the young Hegelians, they said the philosophers developed history by contemplating the abstract, by contemplating the idea, the Geist, the essence, God, or whatever it is. So here, the philosophers really are moving history forward by doing what? By contemplating and by criticism and by critical criticism of Christianity, etc. So the owl of Minerva is actually spreading its wings at dawn rather than at dusk. Okay, so they go the other way. And he says actually, hence what happens, and this happens for both Hegelians as well as for young Hegelians, but of course much more for young Hegelians. What happens is they must debase and reject the mass. What does he mean by the mass? Reality, concrete existence, the people, the actual societies that are struggling. They must debase that. Why are they? What does he mean by saying they must debase that? That's not what's determining history. There's an abstract idea that is determining their actions, rather than their actions being abstracted into an idea. So, and they pose the mass as the opposite of spirit, progress, criticism. Somehow or the other, the mass, real existence, really existing societies, is what's holding back the absolute from achieving itself as an absolute. Somehow or the other, the people are the retarding force here, and the philosophers are trying to push it forward by their criticism. For example, the partial comprehension by the mass or of the mass leads to the slow development of history. That's not their writing, that's just me making it simple for you. They don't have the imagination that philosophers do. And the young Hegelians write, in the mass is the enemy of the spirit to be found. It is the material world that is just not being able to fully grasp the essence of history, the essence of the truth, the essence of the Geist, etc. And that's why history is not reaching its end. So what do we have to do as philosophers? If we just apply our critical lens and we criticize, and then everybody will be able to see the truth, and boom, we'll reach the absolute. That's their view. But if you look at the socialist and communist literature of Marx's time, before Marx starts writing, this is just now that Marx is turning towards communism, etc. What do they write? Communist and socialist writers pointed out that, quote, all progress of the spirit had so far been progress against the mass of mankind, driving it into an ever more dehumanized situation. Hence, they rejected progress, like Fourier, Charles Fourier, who you read about, who said, progress, what is this? Every step forward is also a step backward. Or civilization, the concept of it, which Owen also criticizes, as empty abstractions. Meaningless phrases to call this progress. Our GDP expanded by 3%, and poverty expanded by 10%, but GDP expanded by also 3%. So this is meaningless, he's saying. This kind of communist criticism had practically at once as its counterpart the movement of the great mass. In other words, while the young Hegelians were talking about how the spirit is so good and, the reason for progress, the communist and socialist literature of that time was saying, no, that's the empty abstraction. They were saying the abstraction is the real thing and the mass, etc. is the problem. इन्होंने उलट कर दिया. इन्होंने कहा mass is the real thing. The abstraction is the problem. So they counterpose the movement of the great mass in opposition to which history had been developing so far. One must know the studiousness, the craving for knowledge, the moral energy, and the unceasing urge for development of the French and English workers to be able to form an idea of the human nobility of this movement. In other words, what were the communists doing? They extolled the masses against the abstract conception. So the Hegelians were extolling the conception and saying masses are the problem, or the mass is the problem, concrete existing societies and reality is the problem. And the others went the other way. They said, that's not the problem, your abstraction is the problem. Obviously, there is a contradiction between the abstraction and the reality, the abstraction of progress and the reality that progress has given.